Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, May 18th, 2021. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com, and I am joined on today's episode by Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman
Hey, that's me.
and writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
All right, so yesterday we talked a lot about the merger between Warner Media and Discovery, and there is even more merger and acquisition news sort of cropping up in Hollywood. Brad, what's the latest?
So MGM, one of the oldest studios in Hollywood, is apparently putting itself up for sale. This is something that we heard about back in December, and now it sounds like Amazon is the one who's going to walk away with the studio and their library of over 4,000 films and 17,000 hours of TV shows. Apparently, Amazon right now, they've been negotiating for weeks to purchase MGM, and right now the number that they might get it for is hovering around $9 billion. Since they're still in negotiations, obviously there's still a chance that this could potentially fall apart and Amazon might not come away with MGM. But if they've been negotiating for this long, I think it's probably a safe bet that they'll end up being the ones who finalize this deal. And along with MGM, they get the rights to some pretty, decent size franchises. Not the best, because MGM doesn't have like a huge library of intellectual property that people are clamoring for, but it does include their portion of the rights for James Bond, The Hobbit, the Rocky and Creed franchises, RoboCop, The Pink Panther, Stargate, Silence of the Lambs, and then their TV shows include things like Fargo, Vikings, Teen Wolf, Get Shorty, both the movie and the TV series. And they also have a pretty decent unscripted library of shows as well, including The Voice, Survivor, Shark Tank, and The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. So it's just a very eclectic and varied library of titles that will help beef up Amazon's streaming library, and will also give them an opportunity to potentially craft some new quote unquote original franchises of their own, whether it's sequelizing, remaking, reimagining, turning movies into TV shows or TV shows into movies, whichever way you want to go. And so it's a big move for Amazon to beef up their property that they have available to create more content.
I was going to ask you about that, Brad. Do you think the reasoning behind this decision is to bolster the library, or to sort of tap into these things and make new new entries in the RoboCop franchise, for example, or the Hobbit or whatever? Like, do you think it's more to build up Amazon's library? Because I know they have a ton of stuff there, but their user interface is just the thing that seems to be holding people back from, always talking about Amazon Prime Video in like the high terms that sometimes people talk about other streaming services.
I think it's probably both, because Amazon does have some good stuff in streaming, but their library also has a lot of crap in it as well, just like terrible B movies and just stuff you've never heard of before. And so this will help bolster that. And I think that they also want to have some familiar intellectual property that they can play with to turn into new stuff that will entice people to subscribe as well, because they have some good originals on their own, but what they don't have a lot of is recognizable franchises that other streaming services have gotten their hands on and help build their library. So I think that a combination of having all these titles in their streaming library in their original form, and then also the ability to create new versions of them will probably help. And plus, you have some of these movies from MGM, a lot of them actually, they constantly jump around to different streaming services. And so with this way, if Amazon has the rights to all these movies, A, they don't have to pay for licensing them for a certain period anymore, and B, some of them might become exclusive to Amazon and therefore wouldn't necessarily be easily available for places like Netflix or Hulu and what have you to grab and put in their own libraries.
Right. Okay. So before we move on, I want to ask you about something that you might not know the answer to. But you mentioned that some of the stuff that is under MGM's purview is the James Bond franchise, and you said specifically like their portion of the rights to the James Bond franchise. I know that's a little bit complicated. Do you have any sense of what that particular piece of intellectual property, like what is going to happen with that should this deal go through?
I'm not actually sure, because it's MGM has been involved with the James Bond franchise forever, and so I don't necessarily know when MGM gets purchased what happens to that. If it's something where that Amazon will basically take the place of MGM in the James Bond franchise moving forward with whichever studio has the distribution rights or what. So that is unclear because the James Bond rights have always been kind of a complicated thing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right. Let's move to our next item, which is some very exciting news about a new project for actor John Boyega. Chris, tell us about that.
Yes, it is Attack the Block 2, which is finally happening. The original came out in 2011 and it became a big, not like a blockbuster, but a big like cult hit. People just loved that movie. And ever since it's come out pretty much, director Joe Cornish and star John Boyega have been talking about wanting to do a sequel. And for the longest time, it just sort of seemed like a pipe dream. Like, they want to do it, but it'll never happen. But now it really is happening. And both Joe Cornish and John Boyega are both coming back for the sequel.
Do we know anything about what the plot is going to be, Chris?
Not really. I mean, it's safe to assume it will once again involve, aliens, because that's what the first movie was about. But we don't really know a whole lot about the plot just yet.
So were you one of the people who were sort of holding out hope for this sequel, Chris? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I actually sort of missed the boat on this when it came out in 2011. Like, it took me a long time to finally just sit down and watch Attack the Block. But when I did watch it, I thought, it was great. It was a lot of fun. I sort of assumed that the sequel would never happen, so I am glad it's finally happening. It's a shame that Joe Cornish, he's only directed like 2 movies, which just seems very weird to me because he seems like a really good director, and I'm glad he's finally getting to make another movie. I don't really know. Maybe he's just like a picky guy and he wants to do things his own way, and that's why he hasn't done a lot since then. But I'm happy this is happening.
Yeah, I know he's one of those guys that has been constantly attached to, all sorts of big franchise stuff. I know he was in talks to direct a Star Trek movie at one point. He's one of those people that just sort of appears on a lot of, short lists and, deadline reports that this person's in talks to direct this movie. And then Joe Cornish always ends up sort of walking away and never actually commits to things because I think you're right. I think he likes to sort of, he wants to like preserve his record as a filmmaker. He understands that like his name is the thing that gets stamped on it. And the auteur theory is that, everybody for right or wrong, blames or praises the director for the final product. So Brad, what do you think about Attack the Block 2? Is this something you're looking forward to or you're excited about?
Allow it. Yes, absolutely. I've been waiting for an Attack the Block sequel ever since the original movie came out. I'm a little bit worried, obviously, since it's been so long since the first movie came out, that it might not live up to the hype. But I also think that because of how the first movie, meshed like thematic elements about, the streets and class and, the hood, as it were, with a sci-fi concept, that I think that there's an opportunity to do something compelling with the state of today's, society and commentary on class and race and things like that, and hopefully do something that accomplishes the same, much of the same thing, but in a different way.
Yeah, and Boyega himself has sort of become, something of an activist in recent years and like a famous figure on the world stage. And I, that would be my only hesitation is like the reason, part of the reason I think the first Attack the Block works so well is because Boyega's character is so young. Like the Moses character is really still a kid, and he has to grow up over the course of that movie in a way that arguably no kid should have to that quickly, but he steps into that role and sort of becomes the de facto leader of this group and this leader of this entire community in this apartment building. And so I think there is definitely room for utilizing Boyega's real world activist persona and sort of continuing that story of Moses. Like, it makes sense that character would grow up to also be a leader in that community still, but I'm a little curious to see, excuse me, what happens there, because like I said, I think the youth of Moses is so important to that first movie. So obviously they're not going to do any digital de-aging for this, and it's going to take place many years later. So I'm curious to see what they have cooked up there. So, all right, let's get to our next story, which is some early buzz about F9, which is one of my most anticipated movies of the year. I didn't even read any of this, Brad, because I've really been trying to stay away from all reactions and trailers and everything involving this movie because I'm so excited about it. But I don't want to sell our listeners short. So the first reactions for this movie have come out. So what are people saying about F9?
They're saying that the ending happens just like this. No, it's as you can expect. The sequel is bigger and more ridiculous than any of the ones previous. If the moments in the trailer where they're clearly hinting at a journey into space didn't make that clear, these first reactions certainly confirm that. Lots of comments on people saying that it's just big, ridiculous fun, exactly the kind of summer blockbuster you want to head back to the movies for, over the top in the best way possible. Still has the humor, still has the heart. And there's some dissension among the ranks of people saying that they think that's just a little too much of the silliness and that it's just kind of starting to lose itself. But I would argue that the Fast and Furious franchise lost itself a long time ago, and now it's something completely different, and that's what makes it so damn good. But for the most part, 95% of the reactions are people enjoying it very much and saying that the action set pieces are just phenomenal, and that it's going to be a good time if you're able to see on the big screen.
Well, I'm still very excited about this. I think I personally hated Hobbs and Shaw, and I think The Fate of the Furious, the most recent movie in the sort of traditional saga, was I don't know, middling at best. So I'm excited to hear that Justin Lin's return behind the camera here seems to have resulted in something enjoyable in the same way that some of his previous entries were. So yes, fingers crossed for that. I think F9 comes out next? Is it later this month, Brad, or is it next month?
It's June.
June. Okay. All right, cool. All right, Chris, tell me about the new Pet Semetary movie. I know that you were a fan of the one that came out in, what was that, 2019?
Yes.
And now there's some news about the new Pet Semetary film.
Right. So back in February, we learned that there was going to be a new Pet Semetary movie that jumps off of the 2019 remake, and that it was headed right to Paramount Plus. It was part of a big announcement that Paramount Plus made about upcoming original stuff like that. And at the time, it was reported that it was going to be a prequel. Now we have more info. We know that Lindsey Beer, who wrote the Netflix movie Sierra Burgess is a Loser, is both writing and directing the movie, and now it's being reported that it might not be a prequel after all. Basically, we don't really know what it's going to be. We just know it's going to be a new Pet Semetary movie, and it could be a sequel instead of a prequel. So I guess we'll find out. But either way, it's still going right to Paramount Plus whenever it arrives.
Yeah, Lindsey Beer is one of those up and coming writers that we cover all the time on the site because she tends to be attached to like big franchise stuff. I know that on her IMDb right now there are credits listed for the Mask movie, not a remake of the Jim Carrey film, but the Mobile Armored Strike Command, which I think is part of like the Hasbro cinematic universe. Yes. She was attached to write a Silver Sable film, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. All sorts of stuff. The King Killer Chronicle, which is based on a popular book series. So her name has been around for a while, even though the only produced credit she has really thus far, I think, is that Sierra Burgess is a Loser movie. So yeah. So Chris, what do you think about this? Like, what do you think about where were you going into this news, and where are you coming out of it in terms of like your excitement or interest level in this new Pet Semetary film?
I am all in on all things Pet Semetary. Pet Semetary is my favorite Stephen King book. If you've listened to our show, I'm a big Stephen King fan, but Pet Semetary has always been my favorite Stephen King book. I love the 1989 movie. I really liked the 2019 movie. A lot of people seem to not like it because it changes the ending a bit, but I was fine with that. And I even liked the 1989 movie had itself a sequel that was based on nothing. It was basically like a whole new story, but the same director as the 89 film, Mary Lambert, directed that too. And I thought that was a lot of fun too. So I was already all in on this. I'm still all in on it, whether it's a prequel or a sequel. I'm not really familiar with Lindsey Beer as a, obviously not a filmmaker. This is her directorial debut, but I didn't see that Sierra Burgess movie, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know like what she's like as a creator of things. But I'm all for it. I'm looking forward to anything involving Pet Sematary. I hope it's good, and if it's not, I'll watch it anyway.
Yeah, I have not seen any Pet Cemetery related stuff at all. Brad, what is your relationship like with that the franchise, if you want to call it that? I guess.
Sure. Yeah. I saw the original when I was young, and it creeped me out. I thought the remake was an interesting approach that I enjoyed on the same level that Chris did. I don't necessarily have a reverence for it, so this is just something that maybe I'll check out at some point.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of people will probably feel the same way. There probably aren't too many like people who are on the level of fandom as Chris is about this particular project.
Real big pet heads out there.
All right, so let's talk about our last news story, which is a 300 sequel that Zack Snyder wrote himself. Chris, what's the deal with this?
Right. So Zack Snyder made 300, obviously. He did not direct the sequel, 300 Rise of an Empire, but he did co-write the script for that. And he recently revealed that Warner Brothers tasked him with writing a third film. It was going to be like the big climactic conclusion to the. He said it was called the quote final chapter in 300. So while Zack Snyder was writing this, it changed from a 300 sequel into a story about Alexander the Great and his general Hephaestion. And historians are torn on this, but the general consensus seems to be that Alexander the Great and Hephaestion were lovers during their time together, and that's been touched on before. The Oliver Stone movie Alexander portrays them as that, with Jared Leto plays Hephaestion in that movie, and Colin Farrell plays Alexander the Great. So yeah, Zack Snyder said, while he was writing it, it just basically turned into this completely different thing. And Warner Brothers passed on it, probably because they were like, this is not a 300 sequel, Zack Snyder. What are you doing to us? But Zack Snyder has said this multiple times, that he's convinced right now that Warner Brothers just doesn't like him, because of the whole Snyder Cut fiasco. Even though I would argue that can't be true, because they gave him millions and millions of dollars to finish the Snyder Cut. But however you want to look at it, this is just not happening. But he wrote this script. He seems to think it's a really good. He says, a beautiful love story with warfare. So there you have it.
So, Chris, did you see the Oliver Stone Alexander movie that you mentioned earlier?
I have, and I've seen. There's like 2 different cuts of it, and I've seen all the cuts.
Okay, so what did you think? And I guess since we're on this topic, which one is the better cut? I guess.
Oh man, I guess I keep getting them mixed up, because one is called like the ultimate cut and one is called like the final cut, and I can't remember which one is better. They're all interesting. Let's say that they're interesting movies.
Okay, so would you have, I guess, with that as the a cinematic foundation for this type of story, would you have wanted to see what this version looked like? Did you see 300 Rise of an Empire? Are you sort of like invested in the 300 mythos?
No, I am not. I did not see that sequel. I saw the first one when it came out. I remember I was like, that's fun, but I've never felt like the urge to go back and rewatch it. So I don't really care about 300 as a series, but I actually would kind of have liked to see Zack Snyder's Alexander the Great movie, but that's not going to happen, I guess, unless like Netflix picks it up, maybe, since they seem to like Zack Snyder more than Warner Brothers. So maybe we'll get it someday.
Yeah. Brad, 300 Rise of an Empire, which came out in 2014, seems like something that you would have watched on a plane. Have you seen that movie?
I actually saw it in theaters, and it's not good. It's not as good as the original 300. It's clearly trying to capitalize on the cool style that defined the first one, and yeah, it's just not anywhere near as interesting or stylish or competently made. So yeah, if they were gonna do anything with 300, I would have liked to have seen Zack Snyder return to it just to see what he can do, since 300 worked out pretty well. But yeah, whatever.
Okay, all right. Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode of Slash Film Daily. You can find more about all of the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com, of course, and linked inside the show notes of this episode. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all of the popular podcast apps, and send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns, and mailbag topics to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget also to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out a lot. Tell your friends, spread the word. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.